Israelis were back at the polls yesterday, their third election in less than a year. Is this the end of the electoral stalemate? What's next for the national government? And what are the biggest challenges it will face? Welcome to Impact 2020.
Please welcome Managing Director of Beacon Global Strategies, Jeremy Bash.
Good morning, and it's great to be at my 30th APAC Policy Conference. Yesterday, Israel held its third election in the last year, and it had the highest turnout of them all. Now that the ballots have been counted and cast, the real work begins to build a governing coalition. It was a hard-fought election, and Israeli voters have decided the right-wing bloc led by Likud appears to have won the most seats in the Knesset. And Benjamin Netanyahu, once again, it seems, will be granted the first chance to form a government. We are lucky to have convinced 4 of Israel's top journalists to join us after what we are certain was a very long night at work, to give us here at APAC a readout of how the election is playing out and help us understand what lies ahead. Joining us live from Jerusalem, the editor of the Times of Israel, David Horowitz, senior contributing editor from the Jerusalem Post, Herb Kennan, and joining us live from Tel Aviv, journalist and columnist for Haaretz, Alison Kaplan-Sommer, and diplomatic and political correspondent for Globes, Tal Schneider. Thanks to all 4 of you for taking the time to be with us this morning. I want to first ask David and then the others this question. Help us get situated. What's the headline this morning in Israel? Were the results surprising at all to you, David?
Well, Times of Israel is a 24/7 website, so our headlines change all the time. But as of late last night, we were reporting that Netanyahu was claiming victory and that the exit polls showed that his party, Likud, had soundly defeated Blue and White. As the hours have passed, that seems to be the case. The question is whether Netanyahu and his natural allies, if you like, will have a majority in parliament. As to whether or not it was surprising, I don't think so. Netanyahu ran a masterful campaign. Benny Gantz of Blue and White was on the defensive. The Likud campaign was sometimes very nasty, very personal, but Gantz should have known that it was coming. And rather than Netanyahu being sort of on the brink and in real trouble, it's now Gantz who's failed 3 times to defeat him.
Alison, tell us your take.
Well, given editorial meetings, nobody will be surprised that our House editorial, which was prominently displayed, was a black day for Israeli democracy. And that was anticipating in view of the triumph of the right wing and the increased strength of Netanyahu, what we're looking forward to when the sitting Prime Minister of Israel is going to have to face a trial, presumably in the upcoming 2 weeks. And our newspaper interpreted the results as saying that the parties that had strong ideological beliefs and a strong message for the public triumphed. And that was on the right with the Likud and on the left with the joint list, which really won a historic number of seats in the Knesset, 15, an all-time high, which they haven't achieved since 1949.
Herb, I read a piece that you wrote calling Bibi the political magician. What's your take?
All right, look, I think that the headline for that piece, King Bibi, political magician, kind of sums it up. This isn't supernatural magic here, but what he's shown is that he is the consummate campaigner. Nobody does it. I think if he would run in the Super Tuesday primaries tomorrow, he would do pretty well. He's got charisma, he's got energy, he talks to the population or to his base at eye level, and there's nobody who really does that better than he does. I mean, you have to kind of look at what happened here, and I think there was a surprise in how well he did. Here's a man who's been prime minister for 11 straight years. Obviously, there's Bibi fatigue. He's going to trial in 2 weeks' time. A good part, though not all of the media, doesn't like him, yet he pulled this out of the hat again. That says something about his ability to campaign.
And Tal, what's your takeaway this morning?
In my paper, we were looking about the chaos that remains with us because there isn't any sides that won in a landslide. So Netanyahu had a big night national level, but it doesn't have the right numbers in order to form a government yet. So we were trying to look into what are the chances to get out of this chaos, who may join the right wing in order to form a government. And another big headline we are having today is what went wrong with Benny Gantz's campaign, because many, many things went wrong in the way he handled the people around him, and we are analyzing all of the problems of Benny Gantz's campaign.
Now, Allison, I want to ask you about this issue that Tal raised about forming the coalition. So it appears that this right-wing bloc has come about 2 seats shy of the majority in the Knesset, which would be 61 seats. First, what changed between the second and third election that brought us here? And will the right wing have enough seats to form a government, or is there any chance that a unity government of some shape or form will be back on the table?
Well, the question of unity government or not is obviously the big question. It's clear that the Likud appears open to it, and we don't yet have the response of blue and white if they're willing to consider it, and if so, in what formation. I think the big difference between the results of the second election and the third election is the number of seats which is needed in order for Netanyahu to achieve a clear majority of 61. After the second election, he really needed an entire party to go with him into his coalition, and now everyone is speculating whether he could manage to even peel 1 or 2 legislators away from one of his rival parties to join the Likud, which all he would need at this point is 2, which could bring him up to the magic number of 61, where he could have a majority coalition without having to compromise with another full party in bringing it into the government.
And David, how do you see the prospects of Prime Minister Netanyahu being able to form a government with this result this morning?
I think the thing that we should stress here is that the results are not final, even now. There's something like 10% of the votes that haven't been counted. These include soldiers' votes. And the nature of Israel's multi-party coalitions and the way the system works is that these minor arithmetical shifts can make all the difference. If Netanyahu gets to 61 with his natural allies, in other words, the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties and the Yamina right-wing party, then he's fine. He doesn't need any defectors. He doesn't need any unity partners. If it's 60-60, well, he'd just have to peel 1 MK away. If he's only got 59, which is where things stand right now, well, then it's a little harder for him. So not only should we bear that in mind, we should also remember, as has been mentioned, he's got this trial coming up in 2 weeks. If he gets to 61 without needing any support from the opposition, he might have a coalition that could try to help him avert his trial. He might seek immunity from prosecution in the Knesset again. If he winds up with 60 or 59, then that avenue looks much harder also for him.
And Tal, what are you all reporting today about the prospects that Prime Minister Netanyahu will get to 61?
I'm not really sure, because we've been in that situation back in April, and it was trying to get people on board, and it did not work. So we heard today from several MKs that were on the target for the Likud party, coming right out on Twitter and saying, no, we're not joining, don't even call us, and things like that. It's yet early to say, because we are still expecting final results, and nobody can make any predictions yet. If Netanyahu's is locking into 60, not even the 61, he has a chance to form a government with 60 only, and this will be a shaky government. Maybe he needs another person to just step out of the plenum and not oppose the government. So it's another option. Obviously, it's difficult to achieve, so, I can't really tell you at the moment. We'll still have to wait.
Herb, the joke in Israel was when you go into the voting booth for the third election, we might as well go straight to the fourth election. And the question I have for you is, what do you see as the prospects for a potential stalemate and a potential unprecedented fourth election?
Look, I think you actually put your finger on the issue here. Things have changed since last April. What's changed is the country is just sick of elections, right? We went through the third election within 11 months. People don't want to go to a fourth election. There was a poll among blue and white voters asking, what would you rather have, sitting with Netanyahu or going back to a fourth election? And 70% of them said sitting with Netanyahu. So I do think that things have changed since the stalemate in April, in that the country just doesn't want to go there again. The politicians don't want to go there again. So I think that this time they'll kind of come to some kind of maneuvering to prevent that from happening.
Okay, so who are going to be the kingmakers? Who are going to be some of the wild cards that you're going to be watching over the next several weeks? Tal, let me start with you.
So obviously we need to look into what's Lieberman, the former defense minister and former foreign affairs minister, Victor Lieberman, we need to look at what he's going to do. He came out yesterday, immediately after the election, and said right out, I'm not going to join a right-wing religious nationalist government, implying that he may join a government that will include, again, blue and white and Netanyahu. But I think the grave situation, the personal situation between Netanyahu and himself in the last year has made it really difficult for Netanyahu to work with him. So, and also you may look into Orly Levy, who is heading the party Gesher. She is now part of the Labor. Everybody say that she may split from the Labor and join the right wing, but it's a tough call. She was able to do it in September and she didn't do it. So I'm not really sure what she's going to do. She belongs to the right wing by ideology, but her economic stances are very much into the left, to the deep left. And this is really what she cares about. If she will be suggested to be health minister or maybe welfare minister, she may consider, but it's early to say.
So you're predicting that potentially Gesher, which means bridge in English, she could be a bridge to that governing majority. Allison, who do you see as some of the key players over the next few weeks?
Well, I agree with Tal that Lieberman is key and Orly Levy is a wild card. I think a really important factor is going to be whether the blue and white party stays united and really manages to stick together after this third election. It did it twice. It stayed together. But there is going to be a huge temptation on the part of some of the parties that make up this three-party conglomeration that we call blue and white to consider joining Netanyahu in order to create a more moderate Netanyahu government. So I think that that's a really key point, how united and how committed the leaders of the blue and white party are to one another.
David?
Yeah, these points are all valid. It's just amazing the reversal here. Until yesterday, it was Netanyahu who was really in trouble, and would the Likud fall apart, or would people oppose him from within Likud? Would they seek to oust him if he didn't do too well? And now it's the other way around. It's whether blue and white holds together. Can Gantz keep them all under his leadership when he's failed 3 times to beat Netanyahu? But I would just add that one thing again. We haven't seen the soldiers' votes yet. Soldiers' votes tend to lean to the right. They might help Netanyahu to 61 without needing anyone to defect or anyone to join him in a unity partnership.
Herb, who are you watching over the next few weeks?
Look, and there's one name out there, Omer Yankelovich. She's a Haredi member of Blue and White. She's been pegged as somebody who could possibly defect. I remember that name. She made some disparaging comments on tape about Gantz. Look, I think you have an interesting situation here where if Netanyahu comes to one of the parties, or Blue and White, and says, look, join my government, I think there will be people inside the party who will say, hey, look, we have to prevent the country from going back to another election. So all that we said in the past, that we can't sit with a man who's going to be standing trial in 2 weeks on 3 charges or 3 indictments, well, we have to put that aside, and they could rationalize that to their voters as saying we're doing that for the good of the country. There are backbenchers in Blue and White. There are backbenchers in Lieberman's Yisrael Beitenu party who could conceivably, I think, come to that kind of decision.
Good. Now I want to ask you all about the policy choices of this potential new government. What do you think will be areas of continuity? Where might there be differences from what we've seen over the last few years? David, let me start with you.
Well, the answer depends on the nature of the government and potentially the decisions Netanyahu chooses to make or has forced upon him. If he chooses to go with what he said last night with his national allies, he's been promising them that he'll annex the settlements, he'll annex parts of the West Bank. If he reaches out across the middle and tries for something that is a more consensual or more of a unity government, which he might want to do. Netanyahu in the past liked to be in the middle of his coalitions rather than at one edge of them. Then he would possibly take a more conciliatory approach. I think it's interesting, that those 2 parties, Likud and Blue and White, have strengthened over the course of these elections. There is a certain, potential consensual mainstream that could be built. But, a lot will depend on the final results. If Netanyahu doesn't have a majority of like-minded parties, then his policies will need to be somewhat more consensual to woo people from across the spectrum to support him.
And Tal, what do you anticipate as some of the key policy decisions of a potential new right-wing bloc-led Knesset?
So obviously the biggest question, to my opinion, these days is moving forward with the Israel budget. I don't know if you all know, because we don't have a government for a year now, and no functioning parliament, no functioning Knesset. So the country is now being ran without a budget. It's almost like your shutdown, if you may. It's not the same, but it's almost the same. And I think next government, above all, will have to move really fast with the bill of the budget. It has to be arranged by July or August. This is a very short period of time where 2020 is already a wasted year without any reforms, without any budget, and they need to enact the 2021 budget really fast because otherwise the country will be in a deep crisis more than it is right now. So budget discussions are usually a very hotbed for arguments and for political problems. And I think Netanyahu will have to close down in the coalition agreement the exact number of the budget, whatever goes to the Haredi, to the ultra-Orthodox parties, and whatever goes to Yamina, the right-wing party, and obviously the military budget. It's all crucial issues for the safety and continuing of the best terms of the State of Israel.
And Herb, let me ask you, because in the United States' context, whenever a politician or a president is reelected, you always assume that they're going to kind of double down on their agenda. Is there any doubling down for Prime Minister Netanyahu here over the next several months and years? What do you see as potentially the main drivers of his policy agenda?
Look, I agree with David. A lot depends on who his coalition is. Having said that, I think on the marquee issues, right, the Palestinians, Iran, you're not going to see a lot of difference. They don't agree, they don't disagree too much on those 2 major issues, so there will probably be continuity on that. One issue that we have to grapple with relatively soon is the Trump plan. Do you annex the settlements? Do you annex the Jordan Valley? I think the Trump administration wants to see this thing implemented before November. way before, a couple of months before November. So I think that's one issue that's going to be hot on the table right away. But even there, I'm not so sure there's huge differences between Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. The question is, though, is Yamina in the coalition, and to what degree will they press Netanyahu to go in their direction?
And Allison, I think we've got your satellite feed back. What do you see as some of the major policy issues here for this new potential government that will be formed?
Well, first of all, I think that Netanyahu has his eye on his upcoming trial. So obviously the balance of power between the legislative government branch and the judiciary is going to be very important to him personally, and that's something that he's going to have to focus on. But I don't think we can express enough the importance of whether and how this Trump deal of the century moves forward. I think that the presentation of the deal of the century was a huge turning point in the campaign. And so some sort of movement, some sort of indication that he is working in harmony with the White House, I think, is going to be high on the agenda. And anything that Trump expresses a clear desire for Netanyahu to do or move forward with, he's going to do. So I see a lot of future coordination between the White House and between Netanyahu.
And with just a couple of moments left, I want to ask the panel to weigh in on what the overall impact will be for the U.S.-Israel relationship. Herb, let me start with you.
That's an excellent question. We don't know who's going to be the president after November, so that's kind of a difficult question to answer. A lot depends on what happens in the election. If things remain as they are today and Netanyahu becomes prime minister, then I imagine we're just going to continue sailing along as we have now. If, however, you have a situation where Bernie Sanders becomes president, then I think that we could face a rocky road. Having said that, I would just stress that even if that's the case, we've seen over the years that the relationship is wide enough and deep enough that it can overcome those bumps in the road.
David, what do you see ahead?
Look, this is an AIPAC conference, and we're all so acutely conscious of the imperative that Israel remain a bipartisan issue. In Israel, too, we're incredibly polarized. I would hope that, including because of the imperative of the good relationship with the United States, but also for us internally, that we can become a little less polarized. This was a very divisive election. It was a very nasty election. The Israeli Arab community, which we didn't mention here, voted in relatively high numbers, partly out of a sense of alienation. I think we all need to do some internal healing, by the way, in both countries, and I think that will greatly help the bilateral relationship as well.
Allison?
I think that with the uncertainty of who's going to occupy the White House in November, there's going to be a big focus on Congress and trying to keep the Congress as supportive of Israel as possible. So if there is a President Bernie Sanders and if there is a meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I'd really like to cover that Oval Office meeting. But if we are in that situation, then I think the Senate and the Congress are going to be seen as kind of a bulwark, and their importance is going to be key.
And Tal Schneider, 20 seconds left. We'll give you the last word.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, Israel will remain in a political chaos through that year. I'm not sure that we're going to have a stable government before you're going to have your next White House or your next president. I do think that Israel, even if a 61 government is formed, this is nothing to be happy from, and it is probably will lead us for another election. I don't know if it will take, 4 to 6 months or 12 months, but definitely it's not a good vibe here with respect to our political situation.
Thank you all four of us for joining us. Give a round of applause to Herb, David, Allison, and Tal. Thank you all very much.